Welcome, everyone, to the Well Wave Now podcast series. Today, we are doing another backstory of a new guest that we'll have on, Jenny Cohen. So welcome to the program, Jenny.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
To start off with, tell our audience, where did you grow up and what was it like?
Well, I know I look very young. However, I am now about to be 58 soon. And when I first came to the States, it was back in the 70s on the East Coast at a time when being Asian facing was very, very different. And when I first came to the States, I didn't speak any English at all. And my parents decided, well, this is the perfect time to put you right to first grade. So we didn't have Lucy Liu's and all these gold medalists who were Asian. And it was quite interesting to maneuver this sudden shift in a country where in Mandarin, the US is called the beautiful country. 美国 is a beautiful world. And for me, it was a beautiful world because my parents were quite poor in Taiwan before they moved to the States. And at the same time, it was this almost unattainable world because I couldn't speak the language.
Right.
And then I couldn't even figure out the social rules. So what was really interesting was once I figured it out and I realized, oh, we're all just wanting to be seen. That shifted everything for me growing up then on the East Coast.
Where'd you grow up on the East Coast?
Well, mostly in Brookline, Massachusetts. Yep. And then I ended up going to university at Brandeis University. And then from there, because I wasn't going to be a doctor or lawyer, great disappointment to my parents, ended up becoming an occupational therapist at Boston University. And then
So we'll get to that. We want to know now. Were you your only child, or do you have some siblings that were going through this with you?
I had a younger brother. A younger brother who was ordained his second mother. So it's very, very important to note that because that really formulated why I went into coaching later on.
How much younger is he than you?
He was only 18 months.
Okay. All right.
So you were a young mother.
I was a very, very young mother.
We always like to know where our guests fit in their family relationships, and quite often, those older children really do take a more of a responsible path and helping with the caregiving of the younger children. So appreciate you sharing that with us. You've got some rich history, not just being a boring, grew up in the United States, and so especially with the Asian culture, there's so many traditions. So do you have any family traditions that you grew up with, enjoy, and then have carried on with your own family?
Yes. Okay, so the irony is my parents both come from very close-knit families back in Taiwan. And when they immigrated to the States, they didn't have an extended family. And because they were immigrants, even though my mom worked for a pretty high-level government in Taiwan, and my father had a degree in teaching, when they came to the States, they could not do those same jobs, right? Because of the language barrier, because they were not yet US citizens at the time. They opened up a restaurant and went into the restaurant business. And restaurant business means that you're really not home. You're working for most of the day. And the meals that we would have on my father's day off were something that I really treasured growing up. So now my kids are homeschooled. So we ended up homeschooling our kids from kindergarten through to college, and they are avid learners. And part of their tradition was our home cooked meals. Now we're 4 adults with 4 different diets. My husband's full vegan, low oil, gluten-free. My son is gluten-free and no dairy. My daughter is vegan with gluten-free, but she can have eggs. But my son's really allergic to multiple different things. And me, I have no idea what I'm doing at this point because 3 people with very different food choices. And post my breast cancer, though, I did discover that through some research, I cannot have whey products in my personal history because Asian people don't really have a lot of whey products. It's not something built into our culture. And so we have come up with food recipes that all 4 of us can eat. My father owned a restaurant, so he was really good at tasting any type of dish and then being able to replicate it. And my daughter and son inherited that, so they can bake and cook almost anything that they see they like, and then they replicate it at home for all 4 of us to be able to eat with all our different allergies.
Wow.
So that's great to combine that. Curiosity, what does whey do you? Are you allergic? You have allergic action to it? but to do something else,
Well, have you all read the China study?
no.
Have you seen the movie Forks Over Knives? Okay, alright.
No.
Very relevant then to this topic. Our family, we suffered from pretty severe asthma, and when our kids were really small, we found the Paracone diet, which really talked about inflammation, has a way that was accelerating our need for all of the medications that we were doing for asthma. And so through the Paracone diet, we brought our glycemic scale in terms of food way, way down, way, way down.
No pun intended there.
Yeah. And during that time, my son ended up with type 1 diabetes. And at that time, it was no longer available to us to have a low glycemic index diet. So then, because he really needs glucose to pump up his blood sugars, it's a life threatening type of situation. And then, when my husband found Forks Over Knives and the China study, they were doing long term studies about the effects of a certain amount of protein and the understanding that over a certain amount of protein, they were doing experiments on rats that would accelerate the growth of cancer cells. Protein's good for you, it's just over a certain amount. The specific proteins they were using were whey proteins. And something clicked in my head. I went, wait a minute. At the time of my breast cancer, I was at my pre-baby weight. I've been vegan and extremely healthy, like working out and super strong and super healthy. And I still got breast cancer. And I was befuddled. I was like, what is going on? The only
Mhm.
two things I could trace were the month before I got breast cancer, my husband went in for a bowel obstruction emergency surgery. That was from a cystic cancer from 19 years before that. We didn't know that he was a candidate. It was a risk factor. If they cut into your abs, it's just a risk factor. You're now prone to the risk of bowel obstructions. So during that whole thing, I started eating out of the cafeteria, which had pizza, which had whey in it, and I went back to that diet. And then it was the stress because I was caught between taking care of my two children. My son had just been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and my husband, who had like open abdominal 9-hour surgery.
Wow.
And the stress of that with just in laws that went insane temporarily. So I was dealing with all of that and trying to manage with no help at all from any friends, any family. So those two things, I came home from a trip to Germany because I won a competition in dance during that time, and I found a breast lump, and that was the beginning of the whole 18 months of breast cancer treatment. And that was the only two things I could trace back that could even correlate to why there's no breast cancer history in my family at all. Nothing.
Okay.
Other schizophrenia and other things, but no breast cancer.
Thanks for that explanation. Now let's take you back, hopefully, to some happier times. You mentioned you won a dance competition when you were an adult. When you were a kid, were you involved? What were your activities? Were you dancing as a kid? Were you musical? What was going on?
Well, my parents were immigrants, so their primary focus was for me to excel in academics because back in the 70s, that was the that was the pathway to success, academics. And I like learning. I just really didn't like learn. I didn't like testing. I didn't like school so much, but I really loved dance. And my parents, they did the best they could, but they were in a foreign country trying to make a living and trying to find a better way for their children. Historically, back then, I think it's better now. Back then, in Asian countries, you have to test to get into college. And only about 5% of the population tests high enough to get into the universities. My father was one of the few. My mom wasn't afforded education because they were so poor. They only sent her 5 brothers. My mom had to pay for herself to get through high school, right? So they came to the States to afford my brother and I higher education in the future. So they didn't really care about dance. Yeah, no dance for you. You get good grades, and that's all we care about. And the one time my mother was convinced by me finally after begging, I would say about 8 months, she put me into a little short semester of ballet, which I absolutely loved, Tim and Breck. I loved it. I'm 9 and the only one without parents coming to see you perform, pick you up, drop you off. It was actually very lonely and very devastating for me for them to miss my performance.
Mhm.
And then something happened that just completely wrecked my whole perception of it, and then I wouldn't go back until high school. So
That's
I was like a semi-adult when I started going to really doing ballet and modern and hip hop, and then I found the whole American version of belly dance here in the States when my children were about 3 and a half. I found that, and then that changed the trajectory of everything.
wow. So besides, your escape to do dance from just doing, your school, studies. What about music? I know my parents were both educators and they really loved all of the students that were in band and played musical instruments because they were so disciplined. Was that a priority in your family growing up?
Brick. I was like the anti-Asian with that because my parents, yes, they had dreams of me being very accomplished in piano, and I love making music. And again, I had a very rebellious streak in me, and I didn't love the actual practicing of the music. And I think to date, I was the only one that the piano teacher fired.
That's hilarious. Hey, what
I'm
about
literally
any childhood
taking
memories that are, something that you really cherish and hold on to, or something that you look forward to telling your grandkids sometime about your childhood?
I'm not gonna fit any mold for the two of you. So,
Well, okay. Well, you did say you like the meals when your father had a day off. You like those meals. That's sort of a good memory. But
yes,
any other memory you cherish aside from that?
here's the beauty of it. I've made really beautiful, fresh memories now that I'm present. My childhood was because it was rife with parents that were barely surviving from poverty levels that are unimaginable now. They were barely able to actually be parents themselves. So and they did the best they could, and they had me, and I'm very grateful. But they really maybe shouldn't have because they were really young. They were bearing responsibility that no young person really needed to at that age. Because even now, as we're discovering the brain's development and maturity, they had me way too young. They really did. And the beauty of it is that they still loved me. You know, they're I don't know if you've seen any memes about how in Chinese culture or Asian culture, they don't say I love you. We don't hug, what is that? Hold hands. However, we cut fruit. Like there's a lot of food delivered has a love language. And I do have many wonderful memories of things centered around food. And that is one way that I know that my parents dearly.
So that total environment surely had an impact on you. But can you call out any particular person who has most influenced you, either then or your in your career since?
I think for me, it would just look, my parents are super brave for coming to a country they didn't speak the native language to, and then they became naturalized citizens. They worked very hard to do that. I would say for me, the only real person that popped out was Mrs. Levine, my ballet instructor in high school. And she saw my love for movement, and she was so patient because I remember how hard I worked. I wasn't always a smart worker. I remember the rebellion, not really want to practice kid. She taught me the discipline of dance because she even taught modern, which I loved. It was something that I will treasure. I still remember her face. I remember her mannerisms. I remember the way she made me feel. And I think I want that for everyone.
Excellent. Let's fast forward now into your professional career. And, what is the essence of the wellness work that you do today? And then what do you personally get out of it, Jenny?
Love that question. When I was in high school, I started volunteering at a camp on Martha's Vineyard called Camp Jabberwocky. And it was a summer camp designed for children with Down syndrome and birth defects. And they were all in wheelchairs or needed assistance. And the whole goal of Camp Jabberwocky was to give children, any child who was not as mobile, has a child without those ways they were born, this experience of summer camp. Right. And also to give their families a break. And I remember going every year to that camp, and I would love every second of it. And then at night, I would be crying because I'd be grieving for those children's loss of opportunity to experience life outside of the camp. So this went on for years, and I remember to myself, how do I do a job that involves this type of care? And then one summer, an occupational therapist showed up volunteering, and I went, oh, I want to be an OT. So that's what I ended up gearing my psychology degree at Brandeis Beach so that I could fulfill the prerequisites to go get my master's degree in occupational therapy at Boston University. I loved occupational therapy because it's never about what are my goals for you. It is always about the patient, or back then when I was practicing, patients were called clients. What the client's actual goal is. What do they want? What do they need? And how do I make it possible for them to get there? Because I would have to discharge a patient who was in her 70s, and they'd be like, well, what's her safety in the kitchen? And I would ask her, and the woman would be like, I don't cook. I don't know why we're in the kitchen. I'd be like, you're right. And I'd be like, person has no actual love of cooking. And so, they're relatively safe to boil a cup of water, but food wise, it's not appropriate for me to assess their safety in the kitchen. They would never cook. Right. And I took that into combining with being an occupational therapist is that I'm trained to break down components to get to the goal. So if when my kids were training to do rhythmic gymnastics, I realized, both my kids have very different learning styles. My son was the risk taker. He would just throw himself into cartwheels. My daughter actually, I didn't realize at the time, but I then later discovered because I had been trained in one childhood development and also just the vestibular system that my daughter would get really, really nervous when she went upside down. So then I had to break out the movement for her to attain her cartwheel. Right. And I combine that then to when I'm coaching people, whether in dance movement or in hitting a life skill that they want, how to break it down for them to achieve it. So it's all combined to do that. Here's the thing though. I'm very honest about having no memory of my childhood
Mm.
because I didn't realize that most of my life I served for safety. And a lot of roles that most people who are struggling in their lives assign themselves come from childhood. And the key is to break that down and then reset ourselves for what we're actually meant to be doing versus doing old patterns from our childhood.
So you mentioned you've gone through a lot there, Jenny. You got to
Hmm.
break that down there a little bit for us. You mentioned the OT work, movement work, getting people to attain their goals. Give us a little more targeted, if you can, as to what do people come to you for, and what and work with Jen for?
Yeah, yeah. This is where my wanting to help the world gets in the problem, Tim, because for me, I realize that for people to actually be able to make a change, it has to be an outside in approach, meaning your body has to feel safe before you can make any changes. Right. And so I'm focusing right now for at least this year on women who are in their midlife, either in perimenopause or menopause, and we're empty nesters and trying to figure out, I'm not a mom. I'm not really a wife. I mean, I am a wife, but he's fairly independent, my husband, right? And then how do I find myself now that the primary roles of mother and wife and even sometimes career have shifted? Because if if a woman in her 40s and beyond is struggling to figure out how to make sense of her world and she's not aware of the fact that she's actually in a loop of repetition, then all these life skills that she's gathered to get to this point, then she can feel very like, "Well, what did I suffer for this life for?" And actually, most women in their 40s and 50s were actually already built to be leaders at that point.
And so, how do you get out of it yourself, in helping these women find themselves and find their future?
Well, two things. One, I want more female leaders. I want more women to step up into leadership because we were sold a bill of goods, a lot of us are, that we're really good supporters, not so much leaders, unless you want to be like a very brutal, hard leader. I just came off of being on the operational committee for TEDx Salt Lake City, where our leader is the most centered, grounded, quiet person I've ever met. And yet we were only one of two selected in the States to be a part of Big Ted's global initiative. And it's through her leadership that we got there. And I want more women who are able to step into who they really are meant to be. And the
Well,
second thing is I'm a survivor of breast cancer. So I'm outside of the stats. We are having an increase in women's survivorship in breast cancer, right? However, I still know many women who didn't survive breast cancer when they were diagnosed. And I believe it's because I meant to do this particular soul contract that I signed up is to help women become leaders.
yeah. And so, how did you discover? So this isn't where you started at, of course. You had the OT, some other things, and so how did you discover that this was your way?
I really did try to go back to being OT, Tim. I did. And then the panini said no. I mean, I really, when my kids were born from the in vitro, they were miracle babies. Wherever you stand in terms of faith, I said to God, like, I really want to have kids, even though we really were not meant to. When my husband got testicular cancer and the doctor said, go to the sperm bank and store the sperm, we thought, oh, okay, we'll deal with it later. And then when we actually went through the workup, I had a lot of plumbing issues that we did not know about. Like, we never would have known about it if my husband hadn't ended up with cancer, just so you know. and we couldn't probably have afforded most of it, but it was all covered by insurance at that time. And so I ended up having babies, and I wanted it so hard. There was a joke. There's an ongoing joke in our family that I prayed too hard, and God went, "All right, you want a baby? I'll give you two at the same time." Yeah, it's just been
On the days that seem to be a little more challenging for you, what's that motivator? Do you have any tricks or anything that our audience could adopt on tough days to motivate them? What do you do?
well, I dance. I dance, Breck. I dance, and I do have certain playlists for tough days. Oftentimes we hear of people saying, "Oh, you dance to bring your energy up." I'll actually dance to express my sadness if I need to. My husband was just in the hospital end of October through most of November for two separate surgeries. And it was really scary. And, a lot of times we are encouraged to move beyond it already and be grateful he's alive, which he really was in danger of his life twice in a row. Part of our birthright is to be given the permission to feel the range of feelings, and that's how you actually can get beyond them. So if you're having a hard day, put on a sad song and allow yourself the duration of that music to express the sadness and be held by the frequency. And then put on a happy song. Please don't stay in the sadness. Then you put on a more upbeat song to remind your body of what it is to feel joy, because we are granted that.
Wow. That's excellent. And Jenny, I hope you and your family have some kind of a frequent flyer punch card or something for all the medical issues that you have had to deal with.
I would like that very much.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. We're in spite of it all, we're still really grateful. Our family collectively, I can be honest with you two and your audience. We struggled with feeling very isolated with all of our family issues before the panini. And we were so heartbroken when the world got to experience what it's like to be super careful of being outside of your house. We were really heartbroken for the world. We're like, that is terrible. So
Now, Tim, I don't know if our audience knows what Jenny's referencing with the panini. She told
Mhm.
us the inside joke, but
yes.
but you better explain what you mean by the panini.
Yes, yes. Thank you for that. I generally use humor to disarm any type of tension because my family struggles with a lot of autoimmune diseases and we take a lot of precautions. I refer to the COVID lockdown as the panini because for many people that I come into contact with in my work, for them, COVID is over. And for my family, we're still actively taking precautions to not bring any type of viruses or illnesses into our family because it would mean a hospitalization.
Yeah, I appreciate that explanation.
One of the reasons you do your work is to develop more female leaders. Is that your dream project, or do you have another dream project? So now that you've switched over to this mode and gone to helping people actualize, what's your dream work, Jenny?
My dream world is globally being able to, it's two pronged. Because I come from a dance background, I realized often movement instructors are not trauma informed or trauma aware that when we move our body, you're releasing memories being held in the tissue. And we all generally, as society, just want to be more aware of that. Okay. That's one. And two, ideally, I would love to be able to afford or be able to finance globally access to training for that for anyone that was working with people's healing.
Wow. Well, best of luck with that. That two-pronged you know goal of yours, and hopefully we'll make some contacts for you through this podcast series to help you achieve that. But hey, let's get into some fun facts as we wrap up this backstory with Jenny Cohen. So these are just rapid fire, just first thing that comes to mind. Jenny, are you more of an early bird or a night owl?
I'm a wannabe early bird. I'm a stuck night owl.
All right. And do you prefer the mountains or the beach?
The beach.
And you live in the mountains.
I know. And they both have sand though, y'all.
Yeah, exactly. And do you prefer coffee, tea, or something else?
Earl Grey tea all the way.
Okay. Well, we're looking forward to having you on our podcast, Jenny, and really getting more into the depth and breadth of your wellness work and what you do. So we look forward to having you back. So thank you so much for being our guest today on The Backstory. And until next time, everyone, stay curious, stay empowered, and remember, wellness, it's in you.